How useful is GitHub Copilot really, both for beginners and advanced programmers? We're going to answer that today and look at some best practices and pitfalls to avoid. In the previous video, when we compared Claude 3.5, GPT-4o, and Copilot with one another, Copilot didn't fare so well, and I was wondering, was that my mistake? Did I prompt it wrong? So one of the first videos I watched afterwards was this one by Luke, and I want to share it here with you because I learned something from it, but also to add some comments about things to consider when you're a beginner.
That nerds. I've been using GitHub Copilot this past year in order to speed up my Python coding workflow. So I'm going to share my best practices for using this tool for a review. Now GitHub Copilot, not to be confused with this Copilot, is located right inside some of the most popular code editors. For me, it's VS Code. Anyway, this bad boy provides coding recommendations right here. This is really great for below average coders.
Below average coder, keep that in mind. We're going to get back to that later.
As now you don't have to have a separate ChatGPT window open when coding to show just how inferior you are to those senior developers.
Oh, what are you looking at? Oh, nothing?
Now this past year, I built a Python web app from scratch, which, to be honest, I probably couldn't have done without the help of Copilot. I ran into a whole host of issues trying to integrate my app with a live SQL database. Turns out there's not a lot of documentation for this, and this AI tool saved my butt. And it's not only me fanboying this tool. In a bigger study, it was found that those that use this not only—
Quick disclaimer here, only 95 people participated in this study, and it was done or at least funded by Microsoft. So take it with a grain of salt.
completed more tasks, but also completed them in less than half the time. And it's not just a speed improvement. Apparently 3 out of 4 programs are finding more fulfillment, with some even claiming to find the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah, if you remember my last video, so after 9 iterations with GitHub Copilot and not a single useful output from it, I felt like taking my laptop and throwing it against the wall. I wouldn't call it fulfillment exactly.
Be remiss to mention that this has some major drawbacks, especially when used improperly. There's new data to support that we are starting to see a downward pressure on code quality due to these AI coding assistants, with this white paper specifically analyzing 150 million lines of code and showing an increase in code churn. And what the heck is this term? Well, I looked it up, and it's the percentage of lines that are reverted or updated less than 2 weeks after being authored. Oh, and this number is projected to double in 2024.
So basically what it means is you write some code, you upload it to the Git repository, and within 2 weeks, you or somebody else needs to change it because the code wasn't that good to begin with. And that is very prevalent because of AI tools, because yes, they're fast at giving you some type of code that maybe does something that you want to see, but the devil is usually in the details. So once you look a little closer at it, there are problems that you need to fix manually.
To put it nicely, with everyone feeling like they're living more fulfilled lives, they're becoming lazy AF with their coding and putting all that these large language models learn from the internet into your code. But I have a few lessons on preventing this, hence why I made this video. We're going to be building a data analytics project from scratch, and we need 3 major things. First, a data set to actually analyze the data. Second, a Python notebook to show off to all your non-coder friends that you can do analysis with Python. And third, a README to summarize all your results. For the data set first, we could have ChatGPT generate this data set, but I'm going to shamelessly plug my own data set that you can get here for free. Anyway, this has key details about data analyst job postings through around the US. So in my new project, I'm going to drag and drop that new data set into here. So we have our data set. Now we need to move into our analysis. Using a / command, I'm going to go ahead and generate a new notebook. I'm also going to add some key information to connect to the data set, along with performing some exploratory data analysis. Before creating the notebook, it prompts me with a list of steps that it's going to be walking through in order to generate this. These all look good to me, so I'm going to say create notebook. All right, not going to lie, this is pretty good. It generates a pretty robust amount of code to actually go through and analyze and look into this data set. But does it work? So let's jump into running it. Starts off by importing the libraries and then loading the CSV. We can actually check out the data set here. And then it moves into cleaning, where it looks like we ran into our first error. And we can tell this by this error message right here.
Yeah, it's always impressive how fast AIs can generate code, but if it doesn't run at the end of the day, how useful is it really, especially as a beginner? So maybe at this point it would be more helpful if it gave us less code, but all the code that we get is working.
Now I run into errors quite a bit, and there's a few ways you can go about tackling this. One, you can just highlight all your code, right click it, and go to this Copilot button, and then from here select fix this. Or you could select it all, type /fix, and then provide a description of what's wrong here. But I like this button down here of fix using Copilot. It still uses that /fix command, but it pastes in that error message that we got below, so that way Copilot knows what's going on.
This is one of the things where I would hope Copilot could just do it automatically. So if it gives you code that doesn't run and there is an error message, then instead of the user having to click and copy paste the error message or using the trick that he showed here, Copilot simply knowing, okay, there's an error, let's fix it. But that doesn't happen.
From here, it shows us the original code on the left, which is in red, and then that we're fixing on the right. I'll be honest, this looks exactly the same code. So I'm gonna click this button of regenerate. And I had to press it a few times to actually get to a good one. So this isn't perfect.
This is a very similar experience to what I showed you in the last video. You tell it something is wrong, it knows something is wrong, but it simply gives you the same code again or something else that isn't working. If you were hoping, I just use Copilot, paste my file in there and let it do all the work. Unfortunately, it's not that simple.
Now we could run around all day and try to get Copilot to fix this, but sometimes it takes an actual programmer that understands what's going on here to see what's wrong.
Exactly. So when the AIs make mistakes, it's usually faster to have a look at the code that they generated and then try to fix it yourself rather than trying to reprompt the AI and hoping that at some point it's going to fix that error.
And right now it's using a generic column name for a column name in order to search for and clean up. Basically, column name, if we actually scroll up to the columns, does not exist. Copilot hallucinated this.
Quick explanation here. Hallucination in the context of AIs means it made up something that simply wasn't there before. So it's basically making an error without realizing it.
But there's a way we can fix this and actually set Copilot up for better success. There's multiple items being fed to the large language model behind Copilot. First is all that data in the editor, along with any prompts that you provided. The other thing that can actually help with this are open tabs. So in this case, it probably would help to keep something like the data set open during this so we can see those different column titles and then generate it into here. Now all of this feeds into the context window and you can only send so many tokens, and if we look at our data set, there's a shit whack of tokens, and so it's not going to send this all to the large language model. But I have a better idea instead. Going back to Kaggle, I can look and see that there's actually different notebooks that were used to analyze this data set. One being mine, of course. With this code downloaded, I can then put it into our project and then open it inside of our editor to then be used by this large language model.
So what he did here is paste in a notebook that already does some analysis on the CSV file that he provided, and that will help the AI to understand better what it's supposed to do, and this will work. However, if every time I want the AI to do something, I basically have to show it how to do it with another Python file that does something similar to what I want the AI to do, then how useful is the AI really?
If you're going to actually use somebody else's code to generate some new code, make sure you do the right thing and cite their sources. Don't be an asshole and not cite it. All right.
100% agree. Give credit where credit is due. It doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't take away from your glory as a programmer. And the added benefit is if you give people credit for their work, they might actually want to work with you again.
So let's try this again by generating this notebook now with this tab open. All right, so not so bad. We were able to get through a lot more of these things. Specifically, we're actually get through this data cleaning without getting any errors. Now, one thing we get caught up on was visualizing the data, which if you look at it, we actually did generate a graph. But when it went to visualize the next graph, it generated an error. Let's try to fix this.
5 minutes later.
So I'll be honest, I gave up on troubleshooting this error that was going through. It couldn't actually fix it with Copilot. I could have figured it out through coding. At least I'm telling myself that. But I am finding that GitHub Copilot isn't necessarily the best when it comes to fixing errors.
So now we're at a point again where the AI is supposed to do something that it couldn't just take from the other notebook, and again it creates errors. Once an AI creates an error, it's very likely that it won't be able to fix it by itself, even if you do prompt it again. So in a way, you don't send a puppy to clean up its own mess. But AIs can be good at fixing your errors.
Nonetheless, I commented out all that different code that we had here that it was causing the error. And for visualizing the data, we have some really interesting results. One, we have a bar chart of all the different numerical columns. Then we have this pair plot showing how these different numerical columns actually can relate to each other. Now it's pretty cool that Copilot generated all this different code for this. But if you're new to maybe programming with Python, you may need Copilot to explain some of this to you. This can be done by selecting any of the code and then using the / command explain. In this case, we're looking at the data cleaning, and it goes through and provides a lot of background on what are all the different steps it took and why it took it.
This is exactly how I want beginners to use AI tools, to explain code, to explain concepts, to explain what is going on, instead of just relying on the AI to generate the code that you want and hoping it works. Because as you saw here and also in my last video, it doesn't always work. It still needs an experienced programmer to fix the errors. So it's better if you write the code yourself. If you then get an error, maybe the AI will be able to help you. But what it definitely can do is explain code to you. So if you get code from somebody else and you don't know what's going on, that really is a good use case for AI.
Intermission Luke here, and going back to that error troubleshooting that we dealt with previously. This seems to be one of the biggest pain points that I've dealt with Copilot with working with it over the past year. I calculated the time that I spend coding, and I find that the majority of it is spent fixing errors.
In general, coding is like 20% actually writing code and 80% debugging it, according to one of my professors back in university. And a joke that is going around right now is that with AI tools, you save those 20% of writing code and you can spend 100% of your time debugging code. Isn't that great?
You don't have to take my word for it. Go to Stack Overflow and look at any problem there. Now, the team behind Copilot recently announced that they were upgrading their model and using the most advanced model from OpenAI, GPT-4. And when I use this model inside of ChatGPT, it typically gets my answers correct. Yet, somehow in Copilot, it seems to still be getting this wrong. Well, if we investigate the logs behind this error message that we're trying to troubleshoot with it, we can see that GitHub Copilot Chat, yeah, it does use GPT-4 sometimes, but also it reverts back to GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is not a bad model, but it's no GPT-4. But mainly, I feel kind of betrayed because Microsoft's telling me they're using GPT-4, but they're not necessarily using it all the time.
Remember in the last video where we got pretty good results with GPT-4o when we used it in the browser, but then when we used Copilot, nothing seemed to be working? This might be why. And I'm with Luke here. I mean, we're paying for GPT-4o. Additionally, we're paying for Copilot, and it's using GPT 3.5 in the backend, which is free. So at this point, you might as well be using Anaconda Assistant, which also uses GPT 3.5, but at least it's free.
Now, even though I have all these frustrations with Copilot, when I go to the 2023 developer survey and look at the top AI coding assistants, it's not even close. Copilot is the leader. Tab9 and Code Whisperer are the next two closest options. And if we look at this fancy visualization, we can see that actually people that use these two options are more switching to Copilot than vice versa. So I think it's pretty apparent that Copilot is a leader in this area right now.
Think about that for a second. Tab9 has been around a lot longer than Copilot has. It's even older than ChatGPT. But apparently people are switching from Tab9 and the other assistants to Copilot. And Copilot itself is also not that great. And a lot of the people I talk to are switching completely away from Copilot, so they're not using any AI assistant. They're using just ChatGPT in the browser or Claude.
So let's jump back in and finish this analysis. For this, I want to analyze the title column. I want to see what type of different jobs are in there. I commonly use this by just generating a comment. In Python, you note this comment by a hashtag at the beginning of it. It looks like it's going to break us into the steps, and it's going to first count the frequency of those titles. I'm going to press tab to accept this, and it gives me this code right here. And I can use a shortcut of option square bracket in order to sort through all the different recommendations. Now it's going to move into the bar chart. If you press Control Enter, you'll then get a pop-up on the right-hand side that has multiple different suggestions. It should have up to 10. In this case, it looks like it has 5. So let's run this code. And bam, we get this graph showing the top 10 roles with, as expected, data analyst at the top. Let's now get into the final step of generating that README detailing what we did for this project. And I prompted generate text for a README file detailing the contents of job analysis Python notebook. So this looks pretty good. It goes into what the contents are of the Jupyter Notebook itself, which I never had it actually do before, and then goes into some requirements and usage for it. I'm going to go ahead and create that README, and then from there, just copy and paste that over here. And now we have our README that details all the different contents, requirements, and usage. Pretty good that I didn't have to write any of this, and it's just all right here given to me.
This is the other use case that AI is really good at. So it is good at understanding code. It is good at documenting code, writing comments, writing README files. It can do all that relatively robustly. But if it's generating code, you definitely want to double and triple check it if it actually does what you want it to do.
And now we have a full project that we built in less than 10 minutes. I'm not gonna lie, looking back on using this tool over the past year, I wish I would have had this when I first started coding in order to speed up my workflow and help with troubleshooting all those issues that I run into.
Luke, was it really just 10 minutes with all the troubleshooting and bug fixing on the way? Anyways, even if it was, he's an experienced coder, he knows what he's doing, he knew the dataset and also how to interpret it, and fed all that information into the AI to help it. So can you use AI tools to help you code faster? Definitely, if you know what you're doing. But does that mean everyone's a programmer now, as the CEO of GitHub stated in this TED Talk? I don't think so. You still need a solid understanding of code, Python, and exactly what you're trying to do in order to make it work. One last thing about the plots that were generated. Yes, they were there and they were working and everything was correct. However, if you wanted to make them publication ready, you also would have to put in extra work to, for example, make sure that they don't use the same color for all the plots, adjust the fonts and stuff like that. In summary, what is GitHub Copilot good at? Explaining code and documenting code. And for those two topics, we're going to have another video comparing GitHub Copilot to the other AI tools. What is it bad at? Fixing bugs, especially its own. It might be good to fix your bugs. So if you write code and something doesn't work, it might be able to fix those bugs. But usually once GitHub Copilot creates an error by itself, it's not able to fix it. And the main feature of GitHub Copilot, namely generating code, it's not great at it, it's not terrible at it, but as we already saw in the last video, Claude and GPT-4o are better at it. With that being said, is GitHub Copilot a good tool for beginners? I don't think so, simply because there are better tools out there that are free to use.